All right. So good evening. My name is Val Walters. I'm the Executive Director of the Ryan Bartel Foundation. Welcome to one of our monthly parent panels. This one is near and dear to my heart as I have a graduating senior who, I'm concerned about her support as she moves on into college, and I'm not going to see her and be with her every day. As I was doing a little bit of research for tonight's program, I came across a couple of statistics. A recent survey of the American College of Health Association National College Health Assessments found that 3.1% of undergraduate students had attempted suicide, and that was a sample size of 23,000 students. It's a lot of students, 708 to be exact. And that's within the past 12 months, and that was a 2022 survey. The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention notes that suicide is the second leading cause of death for college students. Similarly, in 2020 survey from the CDC said that 25.5% of respondents to a survey 18 to 24 years of age considered attempting suicide 30 days prior to taking their survey. I don't have that sample size, but the CDC usually does broad surveys. So as the Ryan Bartel is a youth suicide prevention here in Loudoun County, we work in upstream prevention. We try to give kids healthy coping skills. Our target audience are kids that are middle and high school age. But as those kids who are middle and high school age start transitioning to college, what are those healthy coping skills that we can make sure that they take with them as we're packing the refrigerator and the microwave and the quilt and all those things? What are those healthy coping skills that we can share with those teens? So tonight's panel is once again being moderated by Ryan Bartel Foundation board member and mental health advisory member, Denisha Hamilton. So I'm going to turn it over to Denisha, and we can get started with tonight's panel.
Thank you, Val. So yes, I have moderated lots of these conversations and I absolutely love them. I encourage everyone on here to jump in with the conversation, ask questions. This is a very interactive thing. So I am a licensed clinical social worker, and as Val mentioned, I am on the board of directors with the Ryan Bartel Foundation. I specialize in working with adolescents and college age students. So this conversation I'm extremely excited about because I've noticed over the last couple of years that where my high schoolers used to be my problematic clients, I'm really more concerned about my college age clients at this point. So I'm excited. I want all the panelists to introduce themselves. So I'm just going to go across my screen. I'm going to start with you, Chris.
Okay. My name is Chris Resengana. I am a licensed professional counselor, licensed substance abuse treatment practitioner. I work at George Mason University. I've been at Student Health Services there for the past 6 years. I came on board to launch and implement an integrated care program to bring behavioral health within the health clinic. And we did screening for alcohol, drugs, depression, and tobacco. As part of that, I've talked with hundreds of students about those things, oftentimes when they're not looking to talk to a counselor or address those things. At this point, I serve as our Associate Director of Behavioral Health Services within that clinic. So we actually have a whole team there now to provide care.
Thank you, Chris. Tara, did I say that correctly?
You did.
Thank
I am
you.
Tara Nunley. I'm also a licensed professional counselor. My background is mostly in higher ed specifically. I have a master's in higher ed and student affairs administration, and then also a master's in clinical mental health counseling prior to getting my license. I'm currently the programs manager with the Campus Suicide Prevention Center of Virginia. We are housed at JMU. We are paid for by the Department of Health and Department of Behavioral Health Services. And we've had other grants like SAMHSA grants and stuff as well. Prior to that, I was the director of counseling at the University of Lynchburg, where I also served in roles in residence life, and I created our crisis management plan shortly after the Virginia Tech shooting. So that's me.
Thank you. Okay, Marky.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marky Pasternak. I am the Senior Manager for Higher Education with Active Minds. And Active Minds is a national non-for-profit that focuses on youth and young adult mental health. And so like Tara, I have a background in higher education and student affairs administration, and come to Active Minds with that lens. And so I'm excited to talk to you all today about our programs on college campuses. We also are in some high schools as well. It's a newer area for us, but we did start in higher ed. So I'm happy to be here.
All right, Miss Erica.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Erica Phillips. I am a pre-licensed resident in counseling in Virginia. I currently work at Northern Virginia Community College in the Office of Wellness and Mental Health. I'm the clinical case manager there. In that role, I essentially support the different care counselors that we have housed on all 6 of our campuses during consultations. I tend to meet with students who have been hospitalized for mental health related crisis. So when they're returning back to the campus, they meet with me and I help support them getting back reacclimated back to campus. I also serve on the threat assessment team at the college. I've been with Nova since November. Prior to that, and well, still currently, I work in private practice. A lot of my clients are college-aged students or just recently graduating undergrad or post-secondary education. And I was also at a 4-year institution working in their counseling center. My background is working in social work, working with foster care and adoptive youth, majors that we're transitioning on to college and supporting them through that process.
Thank you. So we're going to dive right in. So as we all know, the transition to college can be a big adjustment, not only for high school seniors, but also for their parents. But how do we know that the academic stressors are huge, but how can we help seniors with navigating their new friendships, their new living environment, those academic stressors on a college campus? So what are some of the key factors that can contribute to that positive mental health experience for students during the transition from high school to college? And we'll start with you, Marky, but I think I'm going to ask everybody that question.
Sure, happy to start. I think it's relevant we're talking to parents, but I think a strong support network is a good first stop. And, when you go to college, you can't guarantee you're going to make friends right away. You hope you do, or at least make some connections, but it's going to take time to grow those deeper friendships. And so support from back home with boundaries, of course, right? Where you're still getting to experience college while having that stable, secure support network back home, I think is really important for mental health. Would you like me to name a few more? Would you like other folks to answer?
Anyone else ready to jump in? Are you guys ready for Marky to take the show?
Opening it up.
Go ahead, Chris. You just unmuted yourself.
Yeah, I'll go. I would say to add to look at the clubs and organizations at the university ahead of time. Well, one of the key things is to get connected and plugged in. Oftentimes, transition to school is one of the first times to really have to do that all on their own. And yes, there's opportunity to reinvent themselves and do all that. But there's a lot of opportunities to make friends and get to know people. And also it's navigating that in a new way. So diving in and jumping into that could be really helpful.
Mm-hmm. And I would say as parents, as you have the opportunity to have orientations for the students to attend orientations, those are really important. And also parents can often be anxious and sad. The less you can kind of show that and the more you can be excited about the opportunities that are to come for your student, that's important. And I would also say, especially if your student is a first generation college student, there are a number of programs that most colleges and universities now offer that allow students to come back even before their first year students, the traditional first year students move in, and they can have a few extra days to kind of get acclimated. If they have that opportunity, those are really great programs that really help students to get connected with a smaller group before the larger group comes in.
I would also add to that, setting realistic expectations. I really like what Marky said about we can't we don't know when your kid is going to make those new friendships and gather those new relationships. And I think we're not really taught what friendships look like. And so in school, it's the people that are in your classes, like they live in your neighborhood, they go to school with you. This is a very different environment. So having those conversations of, this is how you step out of your comfort zone, and it's what does making a friend look like, I think are really important. I have these conversations with clients pretty regularly of friendship doesn't happen on day 2 or day 3. There's going to be a couple of days where you feel lonely, where you feel bored, you feel left out. But how do we push through that rather than, wanting to run home? Also, don't let your kids run home, but we'll talk about that later. I wanted to, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Erica.
Oh, I was just going to add, I think this is a perfect opportunity also to just reduce the stigma and normalize the conversation around mental health with your students. Just letting them know, the different things that they might experience, the common things, depression, anxiety, just all the things that come along with transition. And, even having conversations of shared experience in your life and transition from senior year into the next thing, whether it's college or working, and just opening that door to let them know, like, there is space here for you to have these conversations here at home as well.
So Erica, I want to piggyback on that a little bit more. What are some ways that parents can best establish emotional safety with their students from the start of college to support their mental health needs while in college?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So starting with that, the open communication and having those conversations with them as well, and seeing how they're doing, letting them know, again, reinforcing that door is open, discussing a plan with them, if they happen to come into crisis and or just not sure what to do, already having those conversations and maybe having something identified. And then also just educating yourself as a parent on what support services that the college that they're attending has to offer, familiarizing yourself with the counseling center, with any possible accommodations, things of that nature, knowing that your student will have to take the lead on seeking out those services, but knowing that they're available and kind of giving that information to them as well.
Thank you. Anyone want to jump in?
I'll just, sorry, Chris, if you want to go, that's fine.
Go ahead, Marky.
Just one last thought is just, I think it'd be good to just kind of monitor over the summer and just observe what self-care techniques your students typically use, right? So like if you've got a student who likes to go on a run every day to just blow off some steam, or if they like to meditate, or if they enjoy talking on the phone with friends, like, make sure that you encourage they do those things too in college, and then also try to encourage them to adopt new self-care habits that might be more appropriate or beneficial in the college environment. And so, that might look like going to the recreation center to exercise. That might look like going to a support group of some sort. And, when you hear support group, it kind of goes, oh, do you need to be in some sort of mental health crisis to go in a support group? No, of course not. There's a lot of campuses have support groups for going through a transition, or how to make friends, or all these kinds of different things. So I would just really look at what they like to do for self-care and keep encouraging it, and make sure it becomes a habit. Help them make it become a habit.
Chris.
I was just going to add, going back to setting realistic expectations. Sometimes we, society, all of us, have we romanticize college. It's going to be this great experience. You're going to have everything's going to be great. And sometimes students going into it, especially with a history of mental health, think, oh man, I'm not going to have to deal with all this stuff there. I get to leave everything behind, everything that I dealt with as a teenager, all that stuff is behind me and I'm going to go to college and everything's going to be great. And so just being open, whether you can share experience for college yourself, or just going into adulthood and stepping into adulthood and being authentic and genuine of, yes, there were certain things that were amazing. There are other things that were tough. And really giving them permission to struggle and to need help and to ask for help.
Mhm. Yeah, I think I agree with everything that's been said. And additionally, planning ahead, and this was kind of said before, but planning ahead with your student, if they don't feel like they can come to you about something, and probably you've had this conversation with your students in high school, then who can you go to? So you kind of already have your list of go-to people. And then you're also then, when we talk about safety, you're giving them permission to literally talk to somebody besides you if they don't feel like you're the person that they want to talk to. You're literally saying, here's somebody else. And if there isn't anybody else in their life, then obviously giving them the information for something like counseling services or the Dean of Students office. And I'm sure we'll talk about that later.
Yes. I would like for us to talk a little bit about what are some of the common concerns or difficulties that we see with the transition of going into college. Like, I like to tell my clients that those first 6 weeks are probably the hardest 6 weeks ever. It's that adjustment into a brand new lifestyle, a brand new city, a brand new everything. And so what are you guys seeing as some of the common trends in that difficulty? I'll start with you, Tara.
Okay, well, one that I'm going to speak to, one that we don't talk about as often. And that's the struggle that happens after about 3 weeks of trying to fit in and making maybe some poor choices sometimes. And I think if you can talk to your students about, how they might try to fit in and the things that they might do or might not want to do in order to fit in. Because what I see a lot, or what I saw a lot in the counseling center about 3 weeks in, were students who really felt like they were all connected to begin with, and then they just kind of found out this was kind of just a false set of friends, and they still kind of feel lost. And so certainly talking to them about it's totally normal. Almost every single student who starts at a college or university, if they're going away from home, feels lonely. They feel homesick. And the other population I want to mention is only 7% of high school athletes go on to participate in varsity level sports in college. And so we have a lot of identity concerns in that sense of identity concerns where, you were an athlete, you were known as an athlete in high school, and you go to college and you're just kind of a regular college student. And so there's some identity issues there. And so also encouraging those students to get involved with clubs and intramurals and that sort of thing. So I kind of went off on that. Somebody bring us back to the original question.
Erica, I choose you. The original question was about, now I lost my train of thought, was about setting those expectations with your student, and how do you, what are some of the common things that we see with students transitioning to college?
Mm-hmm. Similar to what Tara just mentioned, academically, sometimes there are students who, performing very well academically in high school, and it came easy to them, and they find themselves struggling a bit with that in college. So just having those conversations as well. Again, I think it's just all about that transition and adjustment period, normalizing that, kind of coming up with strategies on, okay, if you run into this, this situation, what are some supports and things available to you that you can have access to support yourself. So I've seen that come up a lot as well. And
So
the pressure, I'll just say this too, is kind of related. This pressure that, there are some students that know, like, this is exactly what I want to study and major in, and this is what I'm going for. And then you get to a point and it's like, I don't want to do this anymore. Usually shows up in a class or two and it's like, oh, this isn't the direction I want to go in. So also having that conversation, because I think it's a tremendous amount of pressure that's put on young people to kind of make this big decision about what they want to study and do for the rest of their lives when they're just starting to get into a space of figuring out who they are and learning how to adjust into this new environment outside of, kind of being under the parents' household as well.
So I do want to remind everyone, if you have any questions or want to follow up on anything that the panelists are saying, you can unmute yourself or put anything in the chat. I'm going to throw a curveball question out there, but this is something that I see in practice pretty regularly. And Marky, I'm going to start with you. A lot of my clients' parents have a hard time with, my kid is now 18. I can't schedule appointments for them. They're off at a campus where I'm not super familiar with what the services are, but I see that they need something. So how do I help my child get connected to whatever services there are when maybe they're resistant or, there's HIPAA laws, so I really can't do it for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, I mean, I think one of the best ways you can do this is just knowing what the services are so that when your child is ready for the service, you're right there with the information. And I don't know if your campuses have these or if you could just make one for yourself with a little whiteboard or something, but I used to work at Auburn University before coming on to Active Minds. And something we gave out to all of the parents was a refrigerator magnet with all of the resource offices on it. And it was just like, if you put this on your fridge and your child calls and says, you know what, I know you've been bothering me about going to counseling and maybe I want to start, you can be like, great, I have the information right here. Like you can have it ready to go. And so, colleges do want to work with you as parents. Like there's specific offices for parent programming and parent resources. Although there are boundaries because of HIPAA and because of your child's age, colleges want you to know as a parent what the resources are and where to go and how to support your student. And so, I think that would probably be just something to keep in mind is like, it's still important, those resources. And just to add in a quick tidbit, it kind of depends how independent your child is right now, if you're used to making their appointments. What my mom did my senior year of high school was actually have me start making my hair appointments. She was like, oh, you're getting your hair cut. Why don't you call, you talk to them? Because she's like, you're going to have to start making appointments for yourself in college. And it was something that just never really occurred to her. She's like, when does it work for Marky to get a haircut in our family schedule? I'm going to schedule it. And she was like, ooh, you know what? I better start having her do this. So that is something to think about too, is start having your child schedule their own appointments before college starts.
I love that suggestion, Marky. And I do that with my seniors. February of senior year, I have them list out 3 to 5 things that they want to improve or get better at before they transition to college. And some of it is like, do you know how to order a prescription? Do you know how much Advil to take if you have a headache? Like little things about that. Did anyone want to add to what Marky was saying? Because I just jumped in.
I will say that using the telephone is a big one. We deal with students all the time with that, and it's something that is a different thing than my generation growing up. Just the fear of, and people push off getting treatment and getting help specifically because they're afraid of picking up the phone and calling a stranger or calling a professional office. So that it really is a big deal thing. I will say too, as far as the menu of options goes, at least at Mason, we have a large variety, kind of a menu of options when it comes to mental health. And so struggling doesn't just mean going to the counseling center. It could mean going to student health. It could mean going and doing some of the well-being workshops or something like that, or joining a student organization that's really interested in mental health, or taking yoga, or going to Mason Rec. But then also a number of the schools in Virginia now are working with Timely Care to provide virtual therapy and virtual mental health services for students for free. So that's an option as well.
I will say another thing that I have suggested to teens and their parents, yes, HIPAA is a thing, but HIPAA is also pretty easy to get around. So if your kid won't make the appointment themselves, maybe it's helpful to just hold their hand. A lot of times I hear you're 18, figure this out. That's a terrible thing. Let's not keep that one going, because at 18, we don't know everything. And so even if your kid is on the phone with you and they say, I give you permission to talk to my parent, that's literally all they have to do. And then you can start the rest of the process and just, get them started with it. So remember that. I want to circle back to something that Tara started to hint at, but I'm just gonna put it out there. Can we talk about drinking and mental health and drugs and all the everything else that our students have, that our kids have access to on a college campus?
Well, can I stop with the HIPAA thing for just 1
Absolutely.
second?
Yep.
So just to be clear, HIPAA is going to apply, and HIPAA and FERPA are going to apply to certain educational records. But even as a counselor, I would have it, I could never confirm that I was seeing a student. But if a parent wanted to call and say, I'm going to give this information, I need to put this information out there, anybody on a college campus can receive information. And I would start with your dean of students office. So if you are concerned about your child and their well-being and them not making an appointment, but you're concerned about their well-being and you'd like for someone to check in with them, starting at the dean of students office, assuming it's not an immediate concern, like that you would need to call security. HIPAA and FERPA keep the university and the college from sharing information with you, but it doesn't keep you from sharing information with the college. So just be aware of that. And then Chris, I think.
I love to talk about alcohol and drugs. So, and we were talking about like the start of transition to school. First 6 weeks are big high risk weeks with binge drinking and negative impacts with binge drinking, just jumping right in. But I do talk with students a lot about harm reduction techniques and ways to, if they are going to choose to participate in drinking, at least to have a safe ride home, drinking water in between drinks, not accepting drinks in open containers, those sorts of things. Certainly talk to students a lot about cannabis use and THC use and provide a lot of education around risks with that, including potential risk for developing psychosis later on and things that they're not hugely knowledgeable of. And that is one, at least with cannabis, once it becomes a daily thing, that can really impact in academics. The other thing we're seeing, at least in Mason, more so in recent years, is more experimenting with hallucinogens. That's been a growing thing as well. So I'll throw it out there.
So how do we as parents have those conversations with our kids? Like, we know the temptation is there. So how do we have those conversations of, you do struggle with mental health issues, maybe you have anxiety or depression or ADHD or whatever, which makes them a higher class of people that will be, pulled into that arena. So how do we have those open conversations without saying, shame on you, don't try anything, but also, like, we don't want to give permission, but we also don't want to pretend it's not going to happen.
We can at least give permission for them to talk about it with us, if that
Love
makes sense. If we can at least do that, it opens the door for a conversation. And with a lot of things, just asking them, hey, what is your thoughts on this? Or what is your plan with this? Even just the healthy first semester, what are you going to do to be successful this first semester? What do you need to have happen? Or what do you need in your life to be successful in your first semester at college? Can be a helpful conversation.
I'll let anyone jump in. So I will say also, if your child does come to you to have these conversations, it's really important to monitor your reaction. So if you say things like that make them feel shameful or guilty, that is the first and last time they will have these open conversations with you. So again, we're not giving permission, but we are like, oh, that's interesting. You're like, what's appealing about that? Or how are you going to keep yourself safe? Those conversations, rather than, have you lost your mind? Are you crazy? Don't do that. That's dangerous. Like, that doesn't keep the lines of communication open. I'm a big fan of taking a self-time out. If your kid says something to you that you're like, oh, I don't even know what to do with this, take a time out. Like, okay, I need to think about that. Walk away. We are not obligated to respond to those things in the moment, because it's more important that you respond effectively rather than respond immediately.
One of the things I will say, and I'm not trying to do any sort of scare tactics here, but with our students who felt that they could not talk about their mistakes that they may have made with regard to alcohol or drug use or whatever, if the ones who are most afraid of their parents finding out about their mistakes tended to be the ones who also made really poor choices with getting help. So they find themselves in the hospital because they weren't able to kind of ask for help or to talk with anyone about kind of what is healthy use. Not to say you give permission, but it does help for students to at least know if they do mess up or go against maybe your family values or their own personal values or beliefs, then again, this is where you can go for help, because we're all going to mess up from time to time. So
I really like that, the idea of just normalizing that the mess up and the help are all part of the college experience also.
I'm going to add to this too. Sometimes, especially at this age, it's helpful to pull in or give background. If there's anybody in the family history that has this, even the student doesn't know about it before, sometimes that's a helpful segue of, hey, I want to talk to you as you're going in, because we've had people in the family that have struggled with this, and I just want you to know. So that can be a good non-defensive on their part, just lets their guard down. That's what I want to say.
Erica, did you want to jump in?
I'll just add that I think for and take yourself back to that age and think about some of the things that perhaps you were faced with in terms of, peer pressures, these transitions, all these things we're talking about, trying to put yourself back into that space and think about some of the things that would have been helpful for you. Most times it's something that would be helpful for your child and student as well.
I like that. I think that's a great suggestion. So we use the word support a lot tonight, and I want to define support, because I mentioned earlier this idea of if your kid wants to come home, like, don't let them. Sometimes that's supportive, and sometimes that's kind of keeping them stuck and unable to adjust to their new environment. So what does support look like? As a parent, what is my role in helping my student successfully transition? And Marky, you mentioned the word boundaries earlier, and I love that word. So if you want to talk a little bit more about that, that would be great.
Sure. So when we're talking about supporting, right? I think it's just the main boundary, I would say, or like the litmus test of like, am I being supportive or not? Or am I doing too much? Are you solving your students' problems for them, or are you helping them and supporting them to solve them themselves? And like the answer, you want to be the second one. You want to support your student in order to solve their problems themselves. And I know, I'm sorry, I'm using the word support to define support, but you want to be with your student to help solve their problems and not do it for them, because otherwise they're not going to learn. It's the whole like teach a man to fish thing, right? We've all heard that. And so I think it's setting a boundary of with your student and with yourself, right? Like yourself of, hey, I'm not going to cross the line of like fully solving this problem for my student. I want them to take responsibility for the things that they need to in their own life. But then it's also, making sure they understand that boundary too, but communicating it in a way that isn't scary. Like, well, you're on your own. Like that's technically you're sort of setting the boundary of it's not your problem, but at the same time, how different does it feel to say, yeah, you know what? I think it would be good if you got some mental health help. I'll look up the counseling center number at your university, and why don't you give them a call? Do you know what you might say to book an appointment? You know, how different does that sound than the first one, right? So being that that person that's helping them solve their problems, not solving them for them or not abandoning them when they've got a problem.
Well, and having a specific day, like this is when I'm going to see you again, or this is when we're going to call, or this is when we're going to talk, so they kind of know what to expect. I always used weightlifting as an example for my parents and for my students. You know, if I want to get stronger, my husband lifting my weights for me is not going to help me get stronger. And the other thing I know is whenever you start working out, you start anything new, any sort of new workout program, any sort of new thing that's new, there is some pain involved. It hurts a little bit. And yet, if you work through that and you problem solve and continue on, you come out stronger. But nobody can do that for you. You have to actually go through and do the exercise or lift the weights. And it's similar to the college experience. If the parent comes in and swoops in and saves the child or the young adult child, they're not going to learn the skills. They're not going to get stronger. They're not going to adapt as quickly as if you kind of let them do it themselves.
I love that example, Tara, and I will steal it. So just letting you know, but that is important for us to know. And I would also say we're talking a lot about how we support our students, but also it's important for you to support you through this, because it's difficult when your kid calls you and they're crying and they're unhappy and they're lonely and they're bored and they're trying to come home. That is a painful thing as a parent to sit with. And so thinking about, and you may want to kind of foreshadow this for yourself, when and if I get that call, how will I handle that? You know, what does support look like? Who am I going to go to after that phone call? Because the jumping in, it doesn't, I love that example. If someone else lifts the weights for you, it doesn't really help you. And I will share really quickly, so one of the scariest things I went through in college. So I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I don't know how to go through a hurricane. I don't know how to go through a tornado. I don't know how to go through anything other than a thunderstorm. So my first semester, there was a hurricane and people were going home and people are evacuating. It was mass chaos. And I called my mom and I was like, well, my roommate is coming home. Should I get in a car with her and come home? Like, I don't know what to do. And I am crying. I'm a whole crazy mess. And my mom is super Brooklyn. And she was like, do not get in the car. I pay that school a lot of money to keep you safe. You are good. You stay in your room, go find your RA. And it was as immediate, like, this is what I need you to do, instead of like, yes, like she didn't feed into all of my chaos. And that I was super mad. I'm not going to lie. In the moment, I was mad, like, oh, mommy saved me. But it was so helpful in the, okay, there is a closer solution to this. There is a different solution to this, and I can figure this out on my own. So my mom was supportive over the phone, but she was able to point me in the right direction. And I share that just because for a lot of, like, my roommate, her mom was like, yes, you need to come home right now. And my mom was like, Denisha, but if the hurricane hits while you're in the car, you're going to be in the car on a highway. Like, do not do that. Stay in a building with people where it's safe. It was eye-opening for me, and it was really helpful because then the next year when the next hurricane came, I knew exactly what to do. So it wasn't, I'm calling my mom and I'm panicked. It was, I'm calling and I'm telling you that I'm safe. And this is what I've already put in place, because she helped guide me with that first one. So I wanted to talk to you, Marky, a little bit about, can you tell us about Active Minds?
Sure, I'd love to. So like I said, Active Minds is the nation's leading nonprofit for youth and young adult mental health. Our start from our organization, or how we got started as an organization, was in 2003. Our founder, Allison Melman, was a student at the University of Pennsylvania. And while she was there, sadly, her brother passed away from suicide while he was a college student at Columbia in New York. And she was a freshman in college at the time. And so she had, 3 years left after she, faced one of the most tragic losses of her life, you know? And so, with that being said, what she did is she channeled that grief proactively, or at least some of it, and created Active Minds. She started a club on her campus that was meant to destigmatize mental health and mental illnesses so that students would feel more comfortable talking about mental health and seeking support for mental health if they were struggling. And because she believes that if her brother had, you know, reached out and gotten support, maybe he'd still be here today. And that when they read his journal entries and such, it sounded like he didn't because of the stigma. What would people think? Scared of the labels, things like that. And that's what we think about when we think about the stigma around mental health. And so now we're a 20-year-old organization. We have chapters, we call them, or of Active Minds, or clubs at over 500 campuses across the country. And so we are at a lot of schools. And these chapters, they plan events that talk about mental health, and not just mental illness, but mental health. How do you proactively take care of your mental health? You know, just because I am not diagnosed with a terminal illness doesn't mean I don't go to the gym once or twice a week to take care of my physical health, right? How do we proactively take care of our mental health? So Active Minds will put on events to address this. They will have meetings where students can learn about different mental health topics, techniques, and about mental illness as well, stress, anxiety. They'll do awareness campaigns to try to destigmatize mental health. And then they'll also advocate for policy changes on campus and talk to administration as a group and say, hey, we think this would be helpful for students' mental health on our campus. And so it's a great group to join. The one thing that is in common with all of our groups across the country, we give our groups a lot of free range as to what they do, but for Active Minds, anyone can join. That is the number one rule of Active Minds. Anyone can come to the meeting. You may have to apply to be on the executive board and be the president of the organization, but to come to a meeting or an event, everyone's invited. And so you can always go on our website, activeminds.org, and look at your student's future college has a chapter, and encourage them to find out more information and check out the first meeting when they get to school.
I appreciate you sharing that, Marky, because I have never heard of Active Minds, and I've been working with college students for a year. So that's a really awesome resource to know that that's out there. So now I'm just going to once again go rogue. I prepared you guys for this. So Erica, are there any final words that you'd like to share with our viewers tonight about how to support that transition from high school to college, and also how do we support the mental health needs of our children as they're transitioning to college?
Sure. I mean, my final words probably go back to one of the first comments that I made. I'm just a big proponent about having these open conversations, reducing the stigma. Just to piggyback on what Marky just mentioned, mental health does not mean that, you know, you have to be diagnosed with something. Mental health is one and the same as our physical health. So what are some of the daily things that, you know, you can do to support that? It's no different. They kind of go hand in hand with one another. And so again, my closing would be going back to the opening, just having those open conversations, inviting that, because then that establishes that emotional safety that they can come to you and discuss those things.
So I'm going to ask everyone that question, but I meant to say this earlier. So if I don't say it now, I'm going to forget it again. If your child currently has a therapist, if they are staying in the state where you live, I'm assuming everyone's in Virginia, but talking to your child's therapist and your child about how they feel about virtual sessions so that they can keep that continuity of care is really important. And also talking about what a transition plan would look like for your child if they are going out of state and they can't keep their same therapist. That's just important in sort of the planning. I think that a lot of times we can be more reactive than proactive, and just putting it out there of, hey, you're going to Nebraska. I'm not licensed in Nebraska, so let's look at, let's go in Psychology Today. Let's go on our insurance website. Let's look at what resources may be available to you. Let's call the school and see what is available. You can get that started sooner rather than later so that there is a smoother transition and your child doesn't feel like they're sort of just floundering out there. So Tara, what are your final words for the group tonight?
Well, I would say this is more toward the parents themselves. Your role may be changing if this is your only child, if this is your youngest child, if this is your first child. Your role in life is going to be changing. And so taking care of your own mental health will allow you the space to allow that person to go and grow and develop and become an independent adult. I think sometimes we don't mean to, but we can sabotage their growth because we need them. And so I would encourage you to find your own hobbies and start taking care of your own mental health as well.
And know that mistakes for everybody are just part of the growing up process. So it is okay to not do this correctly. I'm talking to everyone, including you, Val, because I did hear you say your daughter's leaving for college. So mistakes are okay. We learn from them, we grow because, especially if this is your first child, you've never done this before. So you don't know what to expect, what is super scary, what's normal, what's not normal. So it's all okay and part of the process. Chris, what are some of your final words?
I'm going to put a plug in for health centers.
Yes.
First, make sure they get their immunizations done because that's just a hassle for them and fees for them later. It's one added thing to stress out about. But then also encourage them to connect with the health center. Oftentimes that's, even if they're just going for a wellness check or something, it's their first chance to have that one-on-one with a medical professional and start that and learn about their own health and healthcare. That's another thing that's added to just taking care of themselves at school. We talked a lot to students about sleep and all sorts of good stuff. So.
And Marky.
Just remember that, again, I think colleges have a lot of resources. The hard part is getting your student to know about them. I think colleges do their best at trying to communicate these resources to students. It's just a lot of information at orientation. And when you're trying to learn, where the best dining hall is and memorize your class schedule, sometimes those resources like mental health support and other resources on campus that you may hear about in those first weeks that are talked about might not stick in the mind of your student. So a way you can support your student is having that information on hand for them. So when they reach out and might need something, you have it. It's not that they weren't told about it. It's that's a lot of information at first. So you can help carry some of that load by knowing where your student can go on their campus.
Love it. So I posted a survey in the chat for us. This helps us with grants and funding. And we just honestly appreciate the feedback as an organization. So if before you log off, if you can spend a couple of minutes just filling out that survey, it definitely helps. I also want to give a little plug for our May parent panel that sort of piggybacks off of this one. It will be on May 11th from 7 to 8, and it's about mental health and substance abuse, which we know is such an important conversation. We have so many teenagers and young adults with mental health issues that self-medicate with substance abuse. And so really educating yourself on what those warning signs are of substance use and abuse and how you can put the appropriate resources in place are important. My final words for everyone are communication. Like we touched on that earlier, but really just being mindful of where you are and not letting your stress and your anxiety about this situation put a block in how you communicate with your child is super, super important. Val, you look like you want to say something. I'm reading your eyeballs.
Well, you're so good at that now. Thank you. No, I think this is fantastic. As a parent, I thought this was really, really valuable. Really appreciate all the support. Join us again in May. And you can also visit our website for other programs that we're doing for teens and for parents as well.
If anyone has any questions, we are here. We'd love to answer them. We know that everyone's situation is a little different, so feel free to pick our brains a little.
Yeah, I don't know if this is actually a question or just a comment, but I really liked what Marky said about showing excitement and not too much worry. But then I also really liked what Chris said about setting realistic expectations. We have a senior who I believe is in the mindset of super excited to leave this life behind in some ways. So I think we want to kind of touch on both sides leading this summer as we lead up to school. But I think that's what we're going to struggle with the most, is setting realistic expectations, but also showing positivity and hope. And it's tough. So
I'm going to piggyback on this comment because so for any of you who have teenagers that have had like IEPs or 504s, even though those don't exist in college, you can really set them up for some success if they happen to struggle by, even before they get to school, contacting the Office of Disability Services, registering with that office. A lot of times how that works is you go through all the formal paperwork, accommodations are in place, but it's still the student's decision whether or not they want to initiate any of those services. And so it's still their choice, even if they're registered, and nothing's going to happen with it until they choose that. It just makes once they make that decision, a very smooth process.
cool. Yeah, this has been great. Thank you so much for putting this on.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. And I will also say, to piggyback off of that comment, I think the sandwich approach is always a good thing. Like, having that positive statement with a little bit of caution here and then wrapping it up with another positive statement. So when you're trying to figure out that line, we are excited, but we also, again, you're not going to have a best friend the first week of school. Your roommate may not be your best friend, but we can talk about what other options there are so that your child doesn't get zoned in on that one person or one thing. So I will say thank you to all the panelists. Thank you for all the viewers, the participants. We definitely appreciate your participation in this and hope to see you at one of our future panels.